These visits tell us about China's focus in Latin America. Join us for our discussion from Beijing. I'm Xu Qinduo. Joining us for today's show are Jose Ricardo Jr., CEO of LIDE China, and Professor John Gong from University of International Business and Economics, and Professor Rodrigo Zaidan from NYU Shanghai. Welcome to Dialogue. Well, I started with you, Ricardo. We know Foreign Minister Wang's visit to Latin American countries, including your country, Brazil. Tell us, what are the priorities? What are the issues both sides are eager to exchange with each other?
It has been a very fruitful visit because Brazil and China, we established the 50th anniversary of diplomatic ties since 1974. And we are now in a new era of relationship based on basically on two main pillars of innovation and also sustainability. China and Brazil, we do have very strong ties. We are now in a phase of a strategic, comprehensive relationship. So it means that China and Brazil, we are developing a lot of exchange, not only on trade. It's important to highlight that in 2023, the trade between Brazil and China was of 157 billion US dollar. Only Brazil exports 100 billion in terms of commodities such as iron, petrol, ore, soybean, cellulose, animal proteins such as beef, pork, and chicken, sugar, among others. So it's also relevant to say that China is the biggest trader of Brazil since 2009. Brazil was the first country in Latin America to reach a trade with China surpassing 100 billion US. If we consider Brazil itself in Latin America, Brazil is responsible and accounts for 50% of the total trade with China. So that's the reason why we have to intensify this dialogue, always based on the principles of Pacific coexistence. The relationship between Brazil and China is a win-win game in which mutual benefits and reciprocity are the basic pillars for us to strengthen even more our ties.
Mm-hmm. So, John, 50% of China's trade with Latin American countries lie in basically the trade with or investment with Brazil. So, it goes without saying, of course, Brazil is important, right?
Absolutely. Brazil is an important country from China's perspective in that region because, after all, it's the largest country, both in terms of its geography and population and economic size. I think Brazil really sits in the center of China's diplomatic focus in that region. Not to say that Brazil and China are important, founding members of the BRICS platform. And I think this administration, Lula's administration of Brazil, also has a lot of interest with China. Even from a political perspective, I think it's a fairly left-wing government, and that its domestic policies, economic policies are much in line with China's penchant. So I think from all perspectives, I think China and Brazil would jointly develop their relationship moving forward, particularly against the backdrop of the quite dramatic political change in this neighboring country, which is Argentina, as we all know it.
Yes, Rodrigo. If you look at of course, over the past few years, there were, the government under Bolsonaro, and of course, because of the pandemic, the relationship were affected to a certain degree. And now we have the Lula presidency. We are seeing improved relationship between the two countries. So what are the plans to further this relationship? What are the new areas the two countries are looking at probably to cooperate and for investment, for trade, for probably overall relationship?
In the case of trade and investment between Brazil and China, right now there is a big investment of BYD in electric vehicles in Brazil, in the state of Bahia. But also Brazil is very important in terms of food security for China. Brazil exports a lot of soy, and China, since the pandemic specifically, has been looking towards food security issues. right, to guarantee their supply of food in a world in which you have increased threats from other countries. And again, not only are Brazil and China part of the BRICS, which is an organization that started in 2001 as a report from Goldman Sachs, but is now an institution, right? But also very important for China is the fact that a former Brazilian president is the head of the National Development Bank in China, right? The new development bank is the old BRICS bank, and former President Dilma Rousseff lives in Shanghai now and is heading this very important institution. All of this make any relationship between China and Brazil, which again was strained in the past because of the extreme right-wing government in Brazil, much more fruitful, not only today, but also moving forward.
Well, that's right. And we are seeing, obviously, some concrete measures out of this trip by Foreign Minister Wang Yi. You see, like, both sides agree, Ricardo, to extend the validity of visa from 5 to 10 years. Tell us how important that is, for business people like you, to travel back and forth between the two countries.
Well, I run a business platform that unites the Brazilian and the Chinese entrepreneurs, so I do need to come here to China quite often. And having this policy of opening up even more means that China is very open for intensifying the dialogue with Brazil. We have to pay attention on all the new technology and sustainable information that China is providing, sustainable development of China. So in terms of exchange, with this visa application, which has an extension of 10 years, now we can come more often here. And the Chinese delegation that we are receiving in Brazil, we can see and we can feel how eager the Chinese delegations are to develop the communication with Brazil in several different aspects. We can say, and we can highlight the ESG in terms of infrastructure, digital infrastructure, the 5G telecommunications, the electric vehicles and clean energy. Professor Rodrigo just mentioned about BYD opening a factory there in Brazil, but also we can see other companies such as Great Wall Motors starting to develop even more its market in Brazil. It's a very blue ocean for the Chinese companies because the Brazilians are eager to consume more Chinese goods. So we definitely can cooperate also in other sectors such as artificial intelligence. We are also talking about cloud computing and other segments which will benefit both countries. We do have, as I said before, reciprocity and bilateral ties in terms of respect and also beneficial things for both countries.
Yes, earlier we mentioned about so Brazilian export, for beef, soybeans to China. Some figures say 1/3 of that goes to China, and then you're talking about the BYD and of course 5G technologies, etc. So we are going beyond, let's say, agricultural products, probably to technology and the next generation, digital technology, for example.
For sure, we are learning a lot from China on, for example, in e-commerce, on logistics. We say that we are learning and we are exchanging more. So in terms of logistics, for example, China is already in Brazil, and they are, we say, tropicalizing their products. So we have to not only to import Chinese technology and Chinese expertise, but also adapt to the Brazilian culture, to the Brazilian business culture.
Yeah, localization, John, that's necessary. I mean, that's your area, business, so of course, localization. I still remember, President Lula, when he visited Shanghai, he paid a visit to Huawei, I remember. So we are seeing, let's say, probably increasing presence of the Chinese tech companies in Brazil. But also, a little bit of geopolitical, ingredients here. China's relationship with the West in general is not that good, let's say. To put it mildly, with the U.S. is bad, with the European countries there are problems. So probably, the Middle East, Latin America, of course, Brazil is the area.
I think if you look at the Latin American history, I think the past 50, 60 years of history with the United States has been a very painful one. We all know that U.S. foreign policy in that region hasn't been very benevolent important in my view. And in that regard, I think Chinese tech companies' presence in that region, at least I think, alleviates this sort of trust issue. I think you look at what American companies have done in Latin America in the last 50, 60 years in collaboration with the U.S. government agencies, and it's not a very nice story. So I think Chinese companies at least don't have that at all. I think Huawei, there's no shred of evidence of Huawei ever cooperating with any government, to collect information, all that kind of things, even though it has been accused a lot, but there's no solid evidence at all. So I think these tech companies from China really provide an improvement in infrastructure there, also as well as I think elevating the technological development level in Latin American countries as well. You talk about you try to localize things, but I think also that region can be a base for conducting research and development in developing new technologies for their market. So all of these are happening. I know, in addition to Huawei, I know like these handset companies like Oppo, like Xiaomi, they're also rapidly expanding in that region as well. The automobile industry, I think, the
EVs.
the electric, even before electric vehicles, I know there are several automobile companies, you're talking about ICE cars, right? Internal combustion engine cars are very active in Brazil, right? I know, for example, the two companies from Anhui province, from Cherry, for example, they've been operating in Brazil for some time. And also another company called Jianghuai, they're also operating in Brazil for quite a while. Now you have a new wave of electric vehicle companies coming from China. So I think a lot of opportunities. I think at a very fundamental level, the two economies are very complementary. Brazil is probably the world's largest, one of the largest resource exporting country, right? And China is a manufacturing powerhouse. And I think the combination of these two countries and China's investment in Brazil would definitely generate benefits for both sides.
For both sides, yes. Rodrigo, earlier you mentioned about Brazilian stance, that's the political stance of being neutral, in particular, let's say in between China and the United States. We know the U.S. would see China as they do see China as a geopolitical competitor, see the top rival. So we know what the policies toward China, and also previously at least there were pressure on the Brazilian side, now to introduce Huawei into Brazil. But obviously, Brazil, saying they are independent countries, they develop a relationship with both Beijing and Washington. So we are expected to see that kind of policy to continue.
Yes, we are expected to see that kind of policy to continue. Brazil is not a natural ally of the U.S. If anybody knows any history, they know about the meddling of the U.S. in Latin American politics. Right, the support for the military coup in Brazil in the 60s. But anyway, Brazil has good relationships with Washington today. Brazil has good relationships with Beijing today. We should expect that moving forward. We shouldn't expect that to change at all. If anything, Lula's government will try to deepen their relationship with China before deepening their relationship with the U.S., given that his party is very distrustful of America, for better or worse. So you can expect Brazil to become closer to China in the near future.
Well, Rodrigo, to shift the topic a little bit here, of course, we know globally there's a trend, whether that's a strong or not, a trend to de-dollar. We call it, reduce the reliance on dollar. Of course, the use of dollar, then they would call that de-dollarization. And President Lula, is one of the figures that talk about that with some enthusiasm. So where are we now? Of course, you see a currency swap between countries. That's one way, right, to increase the use of your own currency, to reduce the reliance on the US dollars. What any specific or other measures that can maybe introduce in the future or any near future?
That is pure ideology on Lula's part. Again, he has an anti-America bent. And anything that would lower American power would be okay with him. But there are no real trends of de-dollarization. Unfortunately or fortunately, however people look at this, de-dollarization requires that competitor currencies have to be freely floating. right? People would have to freely be able to trade those alternative currencies like the euro or the yen. But in the case of, let's say, China or Brazil, neither the Brazilian real or the Chinese yuan is completely floating. I don't see any path for real de-dollarization anytime soon. What we have is countries that are trying to limit the damage of potential American sanctions in the worst case scenario that I also think won't happen. So yeah, currency swaps and things like that will continue, but they are not real de-dollarization strategies.
So John, this...
Yeah, I totally disagree, actually, unfortunately. I think de-dollarization is not going to happen over time. It's not going to happen overnight, but it's indeed happening right now. If you look at we're not necessarily just talking about RMB or Brazilian currency. I think, we're in general talking about the lessened use of the US dollar, in addition to the reason that, Professor has just mentioned that countries or individuals might be subject to sanctions based on a Russian experience. I think there's another reason for that. You look at, for example, the trade volume on SWIFT system today. It was just reported a few days ago that the use of RMB has increased by a huge percentage. It's now, I think, over 4% now, overpassing the role of Japanese yen, right? RMB being used more often than Japanese yen. That says something. You look at the trade on oil between China and Saudi Arabia, for example. Some of the trade is already happening without settlement with US dollar, but with RMB. If you look at China's trade with the countries that have been sanctioned by the United States, with Russia, for example, with Iran, with Syria, a lot of this trade are happening without US dollar at all. China has been trading with Iran based on RMB for so many years. Now, I think over 60% of the trade between China and Russia is settled with currencies other than the dollar. So I think it's an empirical fact that de-dollarization is indeed happening. But it doesn't say that's going to happen, in that sense that overnight, in the sense of the world is going to dispense with the dollar. That's not going to happen, I totally agree. I think for a long time, dollar is still going to play a very important role, but its role is definitely diminishing. Just like the British pound's experience. The British pound used to be a dominant currency in the world, but still important currency today, but it's not a dominant currency anymore. So I think, something happening towards that direction is indeed happening.
Well, that's Ricardo. Obviously, that's it's similar kind of like to the economic situation, the rise of the emerging markets, for example, the BRICS group, and the expansion. That says a lot probably about this rising power to trying to balance this global situation. It's not really to say, oh, get rid of US dollars. It's really about being balanced. Speak of that, both China and Brazil are founding members of BRICS, and with expansion. Tell us more about the two countries. Of course, this year G20 will be held in Brazil. China obviously hopes that it will be a successful one for this country, and so both countries are playing their own role in striving for a multipolar system. What does that mean, for Brazil, for China, and probably for the global order, global situation here?
Well, this relationship in terms of BRICS, G20, and also the Brazil-China High-Level Commission on Cooperation are relevant platforms for you to discuss and to strengthen the ties. So, for example, in terms of the BRICS is a multilateral platform in which the Global South is starting to have voice, and we are starting to gain more muscles. So it's not only, for example, in terms of the de-dollarization to not use the US dollar, but to have an alternative and use the RMB, for example, to develop the trade. You can gain time. It can be faster, and also it's going to reduce the costs. So in the BRICS, we are also discussing about the R5. Which is the currency, which is the R for all the currencies of the BRICS countries, Brazil, China.
A synthetic currency, I think.
It is.
Yeah, they're talking about synthetic currency. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So we do have several important issues that are being discussed besides the reform of the global governance and upholding the multilateralism, because in the end, That's what China is making a huge effort to establish a common shared future for all humanity. So we are starting to have more dialogue, not only in terms of diplomacy, in terms of trade and investment, but as well as people-to-people exchange. So it's a very interesting and important year, 2024, for this 50 years relationship between Brazil and China, the G20 that will be hosted in Brazil in November, and also the BRICS gatherings throughout all those years since 2009.
Jamaica is one of the few, let's say, Caribbean countries, English-speaking countries. They have a strong relationship with China. China was the second largest trading partner of Jamaica in 2023. If you look at the year-of-year growth of trade, that's about 25%. That's a lot. I mean, that's a rapid increase of trade between the two countries there.
Yeah, well, I think China's manufactured products are very competitive, even in places that are much far away. And I think Chinese tourists probably represent the next wave of huge economic opportunities for this country. It's actually been to Jamaica before, as we just discussed. And so I think from China's perspective, it's a region that is not just of economic interest, in my view. This has to do with the issue of Taiwan. If you look at the countries that still have diplomatic relationship with Taiwan, that region represents probably the largest bloc. Guatemala, Belize, Haiti, they still have a diplomatic relationship with Taiwan, and a couple of, I think, 3 more small island countries in the Caribbean. So I think China's setting a good example by showing economic benefits by being associated with China, mainland China, is a good signal to other countries, like other Caribbean countries that still have diplomatic relationship with Taiwan, to Belize as well, to Guatemala as well. So I think it's in that context that China needs to maintain a close relationship with these countries. And again, I would say that the economies between China and these countries are very complementary.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you say the overall relationship between China and Latin America, Ricardo, of course, there are elections going to take place this year. There's it's almost like a pattern: the right-wing government, left-wing government, often that all impact their foreign relationship, with either with the U.S. or with other countries, with China. So, what's your the sense of judgment of this year's change? Some say there's a lefty government in Latin America, pink government, and now, for example, in Argentina we have a change. What about other countries?
Well, that's a very good point that you made, especially because when we talk about Latin America, well, there's no empty seats. So China's diplomacy is trying to develop with the Latin American countries, not only to improve its soft power, but also to improve trade, to improve commerce, to, for example, given the expertise of China in the Belt and Road Initiative, we do have several successful examples of how China can contribute to other countries in terms of developing the infrastructure, digital infrastructure, among others. So I can tell of the relationship, comparing, for example, to Brazil, the relationship with China, even on the right, on the left wing, I would say that China has a pragmatic approach. So this is very important. You don't want to pressure the other countries to make business with them. So it's a pragmatic approach in which you want to improve the dialogue, and you want to strengthen the ties in a very beneficial way, always respecting these 5 principles of Pacific coexistence, which is non-intervention, sovereignty, non-intervention in domestic affairs, sovereignty, mutual respect, and reciprocity.
That's true. I mean, that's true, John. Being practical, being pragmatic in the Chinese foreign policy. Basically, the Chinese side doesn't really mind, whether that's a right-wing government or left-wing government, whether it's capitalism or socialism, as long as we can cooperate. Let's do it.
At a very fundamental level, China's foreign policy is based on non-interference in domestic affairs, right? Uh-huh. And we don't go around the world preaching our own model. We don't want to convince other governments to follow our footsteps. And I think it's all mostly based on seeking benefits for both sides. both political benefits as well as economic benefits. I think that's the cornerstone of China's foreign policy.
Mm-hmm. Well, with that, we come to the end for today's discussion. Many thanks to our guests. You can also find us on the CGT app on YouTube. Thank you for being with us. I'm Xu Qinduo. See you next time.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
What's behind the next door? What motivates us to find the truth? To understand the world, we must see it from different angles. Never stop searching. Go deeper. Go further. Be open-minded. Be engaged. Open the door through dialogue, where ideas do matter.